Hi there, in this video I'm going to be showing you some techniques to try and get a deep lower abdominal awareness, activation and therefore retraining for those deep abdominal muscles. Now this is with specific regard to the lower parts of the abdominal canister, and these sorts of muscles are found to be very dysfunctional, deconditioned, weak, however you want to phrase it, in people that have spinal problems, pathologies. So we're thinking about things like a spondylolisthesis, a pars interarticularis defect, spinal fractures, chronic low back pain, general pelvic girdle dysfunction. And being able to try and retrain these muscles is not only important, but it's quite challenging because, as you find with the human body, the weaker things are very difficult to incentivize to come back, largely because other things want to jump in and do the job for them. There'll also be possible, particularly in something like a spondylolisthesis, which is a movement of one vertebral body forwards relative to another, it's kind of slippage. There can be significant mechanical deviations which then almost prime the muscles around them to become dysfunctional. And so if you're trying to rehab that sort of thing, or manage that sort of thing, or hopefully improve that sort of thing, you have to be able to get past a lot of other stuff to really get into the focus of that lower abdominal canister musculature. Otherwise, you can often be wasting your time or just not being particularly constructive in your efforts. So we're going to start off with a gentle technique. Now this is the opposite end of the scale from something like the classical Pilates hundreds, which a lot of people would perhaps prescribe as a lower abdominal strengthener. But that hollow body type position you get with the hundreds, and the legs are out straight, there's a significant amount of loading going on the lumbar spine, and if you do something like that and you're not prepped for it, it's probably going to make your spine even grumpier than perhaps it was. So this is, as I said, the first step in just trying to awaken the things which are important. And for this exercise technique, we're going to start off in the rest position, which is lying on your back with your knees bent and your feet flat. I'll see you there in just a moment to go through it all. So the rest position is pretty standardized. I've done a separate video on that, which you can have a look at if you are unfamiliar with the setup, but it's broadly described as having a neutral spinal position, and everything else should be comfortable and centrally aligned. I won't go into too much detail now. As I said, have a look at that video if you need further guidance on that. Now, with the neutral position of the lumbar spine, it will neither be flexed or extended, and flexing it would involve flattening into the floor, and extending it would be arching away from the floor. Now, with these kind of spinal conditions I've mentioned, it's really imperative that you're trying not to further extend it, because that adds a huge compressive force onto the back and potentially antagonizes the very thing you're trying to fix. When it comes to the flexing, we've got to try and flex the lower segments. When you see these kind of spinal conditions, it's often that L4, 5, S1 region which becomes problematic, and that's at the very base of the lumbar spine. And it can be quite difficult to try and encourage that to get that flexion force. So this is where essentially we're going to be doing the very beginnings of a shoulder bridge, but in a much more kind of subtle way. So the first thing is to get this visualization process to that very deep abdominal canister underneath your belt line, and that's going to be the driving force for this first movement. And it's really important we do this, that we try and do it in a relaxed fashion. We don't want sudden lurching, jolting movements, because your superficial muscles will jump in and the movement disorder will be encouraged rather than countered. So breathing out as you initiate these contractions is, I think, super helpful. And what you're going to do on this first exercise is take that breath in to prepare, and as you breathe out, you're going to gently draw your lower stomach down to the floor and simultaneously flatten your back. Okay, now as you do that, you don't want a big jump or change in shape of the musculature on the front of your stomach. And you simultaneously do not want these buttock muscles, the gluteus maximus chiefly, from contracting. and then relax back. Now, if you're unsure of that, you can use your hands to just rest around that back pocket region. And as you do that breath out and gentle flattening, these should stay relaxed. Now, what you might find, particularly if you've had problems in this regard with your spine, is as soon as you do that, these clench up. And they're typically trying to take over and lift the hips up further. We don't want that happening at this stage. We want to really think about visualizing that belt line being pulled both towards our head, but almost diagonally down towards the spine in this area. So you're thinking about almost some guy ropes coming from the spine, going up to the inside of the pelvis, inside that belt line, and pulling down and trying to scoop the tailbone off the floor, but with these muscles staying relaxed. So on the assumption that a lot of you will find that quite challenging to start with, that's a really nice base level exercise to begin with. Initiating that gentle squeeze, you feel the back flattening, you feel the scoop of the tailbone, you're visualizing the belt line being pulled in that diagonal direction, and the gluteal muscles and hamstrings are as relaxed as they can be, and then you're breathing normally on top of it. But the whole time, you're keeping that notion of the belt line being pulled in and down, and you can further accentuate that by tightening your belt as well. Almost imagine you're trying to bring the bony lumps on the front of your pelvis, the ASIS as it's known, in towards each other, and really trying to get that vacuum, that vacuous feeling into the base of the abdominal canister. So you're really using that to hold up that position, and the legs should be relaxed by facilitating that. And then release. That'll take some practice to get to a point where you can hold that for 30 or 60 seconds. But what you're doing when you flatten the back and scooping the tailbone up and driving it with that lower abdominal musculature is flexing the lower segments of your lumbar spine. And that is invariably where the strengthening needs to occur. Now, one thing which might be happening is you might find it's very difficult to stop your knees shaking. And that can be because it's a challenge to get a bilateral equal contraction through the muscles you're after. So if you find that you're wobbling quite a lot in the knees, just get a soft ball or a rolled up towel and place it between the knees and just hold it there gently, and then that can take care of that problem. Now, those of you who've done things like shoulder bridges before will know that that's essentially the fundamental part of a shoulder bridge. And for somebody who has one of those aforementioned spinal conditions, I would normally always encourage them to do the shoulder bridge where the spine is articulating, which means it's going up like a string of pearls, with the tailbone lifting all the way up, and then the reverse is happening on the way down. Have a look at the shoulder bridge video I've done, the link's in the description for that, to look through that articulating shoulder bridge, because it's very important to make sure you've got that technique right if you're going to move on from this base level exercise. Now, you might not go all the way into a full shoulder bridge. We can take this a step further, exactly the same start, breath out, abdominal focus, tailbone scooping, and then you can just think about that tailbone going up another inch or two, and you might feel another one of your vertebrae coming off, but the rest is being held down, and you're getting that nice deep curve. Glutes will probably want to chip in at some point, but if you can relax them and really focus on that abdominal musculature, keeping the rib cage heavy, curving and flexing that lower lumbar spine, you can just add in a little bit more shortening of the muscles, a little bit more posterior pelvic tilt, a little bit more spinal flexion, and then you can make the steps tentatively forwards, so you are doing more and more of a shoulder bridge. Now, because the people who will have these often long-term spinal conditions, spinal pathologies, can be very susceptible to mechanical pain in those areas. It's really important when you're doing this that doesn't trigger anything. I think when you're focusing on that initiation, that first part I showed you with the flattening and the tailbone scoop, very limited potential for anything being annoyed, but you just don't know. So as long as you follow those tips, that it's gentle, slow, intentional movement, that you're trying to just get that really fluid engagement, and that you're keeping the big powerful muscles relaxed, this should be a really nice way where you can build up the base level endurance of these muscles. As I said earlier on, I would build up to trying to hold those positions for 30 or 60 seconds while breathing normally, with that perpetual focus on the diagonal pull of your abdominal muscles, the perpetual focus on the relaxation of the gluteal muscles, and then gradually you'll find your endurance increases and you can move further up in that string of pearls analogy, bringing 1, 2, 3 more vertebrae off the floor at a time until you can do that full sequential shoulder bridge. And as I said, take a look at the shoulder bridge tradition I've done, because that will make much more sense having gone through this basic level.